And so I'm going to go through like a little bit of a presentation, and then of course chime in when you have questions and so forth, and we can also have discussion while we're going through all of this. The current, we normally have some current news and so forth, and what I did this time is I kind of integrated it because it was so perfect for this subject. So we're going to do the current news kind of at the same time. And so I'll bring up a couple of slides on that when we get there. So we'll kind of get started. What we're talking now about today is sort of, we'll never wrap this up, but it's sort of like the third in a series, as you guys remember, about COVID virus and what it's doing to us. So I thought we'd talk about staying open, regrouping, closing, and planning for a new economy. I don't know if we're going to get how far we'll get on the planning for a new economy, and actually how things are changing. We'll be talking about this for a long time, maybe the next several years. But so I thought we'd go ahead and try and finish up from the cash flow discussions we had. As what should people do? How should they do it? How far do you go? One of the real concerns is from having conversations with a lot of various people and keeping track of some of the people we've talked about, over this time period, including my neighbor who's still closed. His gym is still closed, but he's thinking about reopening now. My clients and several of my friends who've been affected in various ways. So we have a lot of, kind of conversation about, well, how long are you going to lose money? And I've been focusing the last 2 weeks on how long are you going to lose money before you do something different? What kinds of things are you going to do to mitigate your situation right now? So that's kind of what we'll spend today talking about. You've all been through this. I just kind of threw this up. We're not going to go through it again, but I wanted to mention what a great job Edgar did in animating this whole thing. And I sent out the link so you could all take a look at it. So I hope you do, because it's pretty fun. And he added a whole lot of illustrations to what we were talking about when we did his program last week. So, be sure to take a look at that. There's our break even, and we've all been through that. So I thought I would talk about what do you do if you're going to start up again, and what are the most important things that you do. Some of these things are a little bit on the nasty side in terms of, well, we don't want to do that, or that doesn't sound right. But I thought I'd go through them. And so if you've got some questions, comments, just chime in. Number one,
real quick, are you sharing your screen already?
Yeah, I thought it was. Where did it go?
Are we the only ones not seeing it?
I don't see it either.
Oh, you know what? I don't know what happened. I was sharing it, and it's not being shared right now.
Okay.
I must have hit a button. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. So let's see. I talked about these slides. So this is the one that we were talking about. Be sure to check out Edgar's link because he did a great job on it. So when we kind of jump over to, okay, so what do we do now? Where do we go from here? You've done a cash flow projection. You know your break even. You've got a sense for what's going to happen. You don't know a whole lot though. You don't know about your PPP loan necessarily. Sounds like Christian's got his, and that's good. And I've run into several people who have them, but a lot, hundreds who do not have theirs yet. So the really small end of business is really missing out. I'm not sure exactly why, but I think it's bureaucracy or no banking relationship, or small companies are just not doing it. Which is a shame because a lot of them are going to really need it, especially restaurants. So number one, what do you do? What do you do first? And the most important thing that you can do. Oh, all right, now, can you still see that? Is it still full screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So first, you want to preserve as much cash as possible. That's what we've been talking about. And it's a little bit late for some people, but it's really important to do everything you can. So to do that, you want to negotiate lower expenses, especially for landlords. Try and get longer pay periods. So those are a couple of the key things to try and preserve cash. If you're, and of course you use the cash flow tools in order to determine when you're going to be out of cash, so that you can go to your vendors and kind of tell them where you're at and say, you know, we're on schedule. It looks like we're going to have to pay you a couple of weeks late, something like that. You always want to go to them first. Don't let them call and say, you know, you're 60 days past due. You want to call them ahead of time and say, we're going to be 60 days past due. And try not to promise something you can't deliver. That tends to lose faith in what your vendors are thinking about you as a business person. And if you miss, and they really appreciate it. And if you happen to be a restaurant right now, what you can do is basically say, look, here's where I'm at. I don't have any income right now, or maybe 25% of my income, and I have to pay my current vendors, and then I'm gonna be paying the rest of you guys as soon as I can. And they're gonna go, well, I don't like that, but I don't have much choice. And they're going to appreciate the fact that you are dealing with them, because the typical way that this happens is that vendors call to try and collect, and they don't get a call back, or somebody doesn't answer the phone, or they get sidestepped. People hate delivering news that, I'm sorry, I don't have enough money, I can't pay you, and therefore they don't talk to them. It's much better to be straightforward, call ahead of time, say, I want you to know we've planned this out, we know where our cash is coming from, what little cash maybe there is now, we know what expenses we have, we've applied for the PPP loan, we're looking at a grant, we're looking to put more money in the business, or whatever you're doing. Be honest, but be optimistic as well. Like, yeah, things, we're going to do everything we can to make this work. Kind of help them know, especially customers. You do not want to lose customers, and so you need to be positive with them, and say, hey, look, as soon as you're ready to do business, we want to do business. Now, at the same time, you have to be careful. You may have to pull in on your credit. If you're giving trade credit to your customers, you're going to have to be careful on how you work with them. And what you want to do is you want to pay for it in 60 days, and you want your customers to pay for it in 30 days. So you can take a little bit of that extra cash flow in between what you owe and what you have to pay, what you have coming in from accounts receivable and what you have to pay on accounts payable. You'd like to have a little bit of help in there to keep your bucket with some cash in it. So people will understand a little bit of slow pay. Now, landlords, on the other hand, wow, this is going to be something different. We're going to talk specifically about that more in terms of what's property is going on, but don't let landlords get away with too much. The idea, we talked briefly about this, but the idea that they'll say, oh, we'll give you forbearance. It's like, no, that's not enough. That is not good enough. You're going to have to share the burden with me, like 50% rent. And so, it's not fun if you're a landlord, but by the same token, they have the right to take all your stuff. They generally, many of them have personal guarantees. So they could really wield a big hammer, and you're going to have to yield to that at some point. But really big companies, the Wall Street Journal had a big story about this 3 or 4 days ago. Really big companies with hundreds or thousands of locations are going back to mall owners and big real estate guys, and they're just laying it out and saying, we're not paying you for 3 months, and we're only going to pay 50% for 4 or 5 months, and We're going to have to cut rent for 20% after that. And when the lease comes due, we may or may not stay. They're tough. They're being really tough. So landlords are going to take the brunt of this. Commercial property is going to take the brunt of this. It's going to be a real issue for several reasons. So those of you in the real estate business, it's not going to be a fun time. You, on the other hand, are going to have to be very careful to carefully negotiate with your tenants to get what you can and not kill them, because it's the rent that's going to kill a lot of these people. My next door neighbor, he can survive a lot, except he can't continue paying rent the way he has. So when he gets back up, he'll be able to stay in business if the landlord will work with him. Otherwise, the landlord's going to be renting a big open space because there's nothing in there. There's no leasehold improvements. There's nothing. And so the landlord's got nothing. All he can do is come after the guy's house. And if he doesn't have a house, and if he doesn't have assets, now he doesn't have anything. And so, now this sounds ruthless. I know. You probably haven't heard me talk like this before. This is ruthless, but this is survival. And you have to be tough. You be nice and civil to people. You got to tell them the truth, and you got to negotiate hard. That's the only way you're going to do it. And I've done these kind of things before for clients. I had a bad store one time, 2 bad stores in one mall. And the traffic never happened the way it was supposed to. And we put up with it for about 3 years, and basically came to the conclusion I was just going to have to close. I intentionally did not pay rent for 90 days. And then I walked in and I sat down with the landlord, and I said, I'm not making any money. I'm losing money. I'm going to have to vacate the inventory out. In fact, I'd already taken a lot of inventory out because I thought he might try and grab it. And basically they said, well, we'll let you buy your way out. And so we negotiated. It was about 4 or 5 months. I wrote him a big check, and we walked away from the lease. And so that big check saved me in terms of, it was the equivalent of about 6 or 7 months worth of rent. But from an operational perspective, I was losing so much money every month that over a period of another year or 2 years, I would have lost a lot more money than paying him right away. I've been through this stuff, and you've got to be tough, and you cannot put this stuff off. You've got to deal with it. When the right time comes along, you got to do it. Pick up the phone, go see him, hat in hand, and negotiate these things, and do the best you can to preserve cash. Let's see. Number 5, pay everyone something rather than nothing. Now, when you have a situation where your vendors begin to cut you off, and you can't buy any more, say, raw materials, you're going to have to end up coming up with the cash in order for them to deliver it. It's going to be cash on delivery. And so you're going to need to have the flexibility to go from, say, a 30-day, 15 or 30-day pay period to we've got to have the cash now. So what happens in businesses as they begin to collapse is that as cash gets tougher and tougher, pretty soon everybody's savvy about where you are, and they stop extending credit. Exactly the same thing you are going to have to do to your customers. It just goes up and down the line. And so you're going to have to be very careful about that and make very careful decisions about what you're going to pay for, what you're going to get, help on, that sort of thing. And if it looks like it's going to be really tough, be sure and go to your banker as soon as you can. If you're going to try and finance any of this, you don't want to walk in and talk to your banker after you've already lost a whole bunch of money. That's not a good time to ask for a loan. So, it may be, for most businesses, it's already too late. They've already lost too much if they're closed. They've got very little chance unless they can get a government or an SBA-backed loan of some sort. So cut your personal expenses to the bone. if you're out of business, or I mean, if you're not doing any business, your vendors need to know you're sharing the pain. You can't continue to live the same high life as you were before, because vendors need to know that you're there with them. If things are really tough, you're going to need to cut your employee and manage your salaries. And it's better to cut 10%, 20% than lose them. And sometimes you still need to have all your people. And so you have to be careful to get rid of the non-productive ones, or the ones that are not producing cash. That is hard, but you don't want to let it drag out. You want to do it sooner than later. Now, if you've got a PPP loan, you can't fire them. You got to keep them. And it won't be forgiven if you don't meet the criteria. Now, the criteria, and David and Edgar can jump in on this, the criteria is changing every day, it seems like. It looks like the forgiveness piece is getting more and more lax all of the time, and the guidelines have changed 2 or 3 times. So you've got to watch that very carefully to make sure that you're doing the right thing. I watched a seminar put on by, in fact, maybe I already mentioned this to you, but basically the very first thing out of his mouth is if you got less than $2 million, don't worry about getting audited, because they won't have enough people to audit you. And so you'll probably be okay. Which I thought was pretty bold, just like the very first statement he makes, because the rest of it was all about the details. And if you are going to get audited, you better do this exactly right. So Christian, yeah, it's good that you're staying on top of that. Sell your new cars. Get rid of unused equipment. If you can sell your receivables to a factor, sometimes banks will do this too. That's an alternative. What that does is that means that you got accounts receivable of $50,000, and you can they'll discount it. They'll give you 30, 40,000, whatever their ratio is, and you can get cash now and use that cash, and then they do all the collections. Or as you get the checks, you just sign them over to them. Different factors do it a little bit differently, but that's an opportunity out there. You want to, let's see, call of people first. I already mentioned that. Oops. Make sure you watch your debts mount, which is not, this is, some people get, so it's probably important to say here, the psychological trauma to business owners under this circumstance is physically, can be catastrophic, but it's physically depressing. And it takes everything you can do to keep your wits about you and think logically about what you're doing. And so you need to remove yourself psychologically from the, say, the personal liability, from the nasty calls you're going to get, from the customer service issues that you're going to have, and make yourself, an employee. You're there to do the best you can to make good decisions, but you've got to focus on getting the numbers and the facts and making the decisions. And don't freeze. I see this over and over again. People freeze and then they don't do anything. So you want to stay focused, get it done, get through it. So as you watch your debts mount, you want to understand how deep your hole is, so you can make a decision that on 12, you may not be able to stay forever, and you want to quit before the hole is too deep. Cut your losses. You want to live to fight another day. Those are tough, hard things to do, but that in fact is what has to happen in order to deal with these really catastrophic situations. One of the things that is forgiving is that, when you're in a tough spot, and business is generally okay other places, or maybe it's not okay, but you're in bad shape and other people are not. You know, that's one thing. We're in a problem that is so bad that everybody's going to understand. Everybody knows that it's not the business's fault. It's not your fault. It's, you know, so this is a unique time when people will have more grace than they normally would have. So any other questions or comments about some of these cash preservation ideas?
Yeah, number 8. What did you mean by sell your receivables for cash?
If you have when you give somebody credit, you know, as customer credit, then as soon as you do the invoice, it goes into your accounts receivable, right? And then your accounts receivable are to be collected. And then when that check comes in from accounts receivable, it goes into cash, and then it comes off of the accounts receivable. So it lowers their balance, and it goes into cash and you know, into your not your revenue account, but into your cash account. So that if your accounts receivable grow to some percentage, usually of your business, could be, oh, you know, the dairy always has $1 million or $2 million in accounts receivable. Fortunately, they don't need cash, but if they needed cash, they could literally take that to the bank and they could pledge it as for a loan. Or if it was really tough, they could take it to a factor who would charge them a lot more money than the bank.
Like a percentage, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and then the factor would, and there are other names for that too, but what they would do is they would say, sure, you've got $1 million worth of accounts receivable. We know there's a certain bad debt risk, and so we're going to discount it by that percentage. And then we're going to take, you know, our operational fee off of that. And of course, we've got to have a risk factor in there in addition. And however they do that, and they'll say, we'll give you $850,000 cash right now for that. And in order for you to have, you know, the rights to your receivables again, you're going to have to pay us the $850,000, but you'll get the $1 million in receivables back. So that happens especially when you have, in some businesses, you have to give people long terms, you know, maybe 120 days. So you find yourself in a cash crunch because you got to pay for it in 30 days. You're not getting the money for 120 days. You got to float that cash somehow, because you've got all these operational expenses against that $1 million, probably about $900,000 of expenses against that $1 million, right? So maybe 950,000. So you hope to make 50,000 in profit, but you're not going to get your money for an extra 90 days beyond when you had to pay your bills. So you got to close that gap somehow. So that's what I meant by accounts receivable. Yeah.
I do have a question on the sale of new equipment. Or wait, was it sell new cars, new or unused equipment, right?
Yeah, I'd say new cars, just because a lot of times those come with pretty high monthly payments, and you can get a used car for less, a lot less. And on the other hand, if it's if it's not very open, depreciated a lot, it may not be worth it.
That's what I was gonna ask. Wouldn't it be the beneficial part of it, the depreciation? I think.
But I mean, keep in mind, you're now you're not looking so much at the cash, although it's part of cash, but a lot of times you're looking at it as an expense. So if you got a nice new car, it's a $550 a month, you know, cost. Go out and get yourself a $150 a month car. You know, you don't want to. The last thing you want to do is have your vendors see you driving around in a really nice car when you owe them money. Okay, that is not a good idea.
I can't pay you, but you're rolling up on
They're looking at your car and they're going, I know where my money is. It's over there in your car. So you don't want them thinking that. You know, that is not a good way to have favor with your customers, you know, and your vendors. Okay, so let's move on to the next. Keep your customers engaged while you're closed and reopening. So this is sort of just a series of kind of a list of things to do your best at while things are dead. There are a lot of businesses that they don't know what to do. They don't have a mailing list, an email list, and they just hope that they're going to open and customers will show up again. Well, okay, that could happen, but why let them forget about you? And so here are just a bunch of things kind of off the top of my head. Send emails to customers to let them know that what you're still doing. You know, in the case of Mario's, when we had that discussion, you know, it's like you're okay. Your business has dropped 75%. You're doing 25% takeout. Great. Why not increase that? And so we did have that discussion about, well, how do you increase that? And David helped on some ideas about what, you know, get out there and go find ways to do business for the parts you're still open for the takeout. Follow up every week or two. But in addition to that, think about things in your company that you could write about that might be interesting to keep them engaged. With the dairy, we talk about all kinds of stuff, anything having to do with the product, with the industry, cows, coffee. I mean, we just, you know, come up with stuff all the time that is just sort of interesting, and it's around the product mix, but it's not necessarily selling a product all the time. Don't always sell. Sometimes just engage, because yes, you want them to know that you're open, that you're selling X number of things. By the same token, you can do a whole lot more than that just by keeping them engaged and thinking about your industry, your business, and your products, but not necessarily with prices or with discounts. Use this extra time to survey your customers to find out if they're engaged with your product or service. You know, usually people are too busy. And so during this time, there are an awful lot of folks that they're not working. And sure, it's great to have some family time. You got to take care of your kids all day. You got to help them with their homework. There are a lot of things going on today that fill up your day. But at the same time, it's a terrific opportunity to pay attention to your customers in terms of polling them, sending them some surveys, getting feedback, going through your customer list and determining which of the, say, top 20 customers are actually generating 80% of your revenue, those kinds of things. We haven't been through that, but there's a principle called the Pareto principle, which is the 80-20 rule. A lot of you have heard about the 80-20 rule. That is a sort of a natural phenomenon that describes well, I don't want to say this wrong. One of the things it describes is that it can tell you where the productive people are. That is to say, the ones that do most of the activity in a business. It's true with how people work in a business. It's true when they purchase things. Now, in a restaurant, you don't have quite that, but in most businesses, it's just surprising that, you know, 70, 80, 90% of business comes from 5, 10, 15, 20, 30% of their customers. Those are the ones you want to especially pay attention to. All those ones that provide the biggest volume. You want to study your sales revenue and go back through all your numbers and understand the frequency that they buy, the volume of products that they buy, so that you can categorize them. Use this time to do some data mining. And if your company doesn't have this, make sure that you set it up so that you do have this. You do need to have this information to continue growing and making good decisions. Then you want to categorize that information into your top groups. You want to treat each customer based on their own interests. not everybody's interests. If they have different reasons why they do business with you, and you want to focus on that. Maybe if your things are really tough and you have loyal customers, you might want to start a GoFundMe page to do new product development, to open a new restaurant, to remodel a restaurant. Just, it's better if it's something that is more community oriented, but I have actually seen people raise money this way for their businesses just because of what's going on now. It makes sense if you have merchandise that's obsolete, like in a fashion store, have special offers, do that any way you can. Try to use Zoom and engage your customers. Show, have chats, show products, do product demonstrations, how to do it yourself, whatever is germane to your business, and try to engage them. And of course, when you have the time, I don't really love social media because the performance is usually way less than a website in terms of getting actual closed business. But this is the time when you've got the time, go ahead and really focus on social media and do more of that. A really good way to spend extra time is to focus on good content for websites. There's not enough. I would say that this is the Prado rule. 20% of the websites have 80% of the information. And if you're not one of those 20%, you're not going to get very much traffic. You've got to be a leader in terms of good content on your website, or your website won't work. And I can tell you, we have really seen this. It is a very, and we're going to talk a lot more about this. Having a website that performs, it has, in this atmosphere, is going to be the difference between people staying in business and people going out of business. It's that important. And it has to be good. It's got to be a good website. It just can't be a pretty sign. Having a really nice website that has no traffic is a little bit like buying a billboard in the middle of a desert. It might look pretty, it's just not going to do you any good.
There's only one company that can pull that off and still be successful. Antarctica's Insurance.
You mean have a billboard in the desert?
They buy it every billboard ever.
Oh yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And there are some stories about that too. Maybe we'll talk about that offline sometime.
Yeah.
Let's see. Evaluate the prospects of having much lower revenue for longer periods. In other words, you want to really seriously consider. You do your break even or your cash flow analysis. What does it really mean to have a 30, 40, 50% reduction in business over 4 years? That's pretty depressing to think about, but that's possible. Now, I can tell you that doing exactly that is what caused me to get out of the retail business. When I had 7 stores, we went into the recession of 1980, 79, 80. So that's a long time ago, but that turned out to be pretty tough on some sectors. One of them is mine. And we had gone from growing an average of 30 or 40% a year. And it had matured for a lot of reasons. We lost our niche. Everybody copied us basically, and they took our niche away from us. And we were unable to recreate some of these niche markets. And we knew that we weren't going to be able to do it because that's just the times and the fashion, the way things were. Things are going back to traditional after coming out of the weird 60s and 70s. And, it's not going to be that way, maybe ever again. So we didn't have a place to really go. We tried a lot of things and they weren't working very well. So I did a forecast and I realized that we were going to have about a 1 to 3% growth rate for the next 10 years. And that just sort of bummed me out. Not that that's a bad thing. It's just that that wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to work that hard, invest all of that money and time to have that small of a growth, because I thought it would be boring. And it would have been really horrible and boring, and I was burned out, and so I needed a change anyway. So, it all worked out pretty well, because I ended up getting this, an offer to get into the consulting business, and my partner took over. So, and that's also when we decided to close 2 stores, and so it made it easier for him to run and so forth. But it was just the idea of looking at business and slow or no growth for a long time. It helps you decide whether, if you really want to keep doing it. A lot of people open businesses because they're doing something they love, and the volume increase doesn't matter. That's my case now. I don't care. Well, I don't care about any volume at all now, but in terms of where I was, say, 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't really care if I was on track to have a 10% or 20% increase in business, because I just love doing it. And I do, I've had the privilege of having this kind of a job instead of doing the other things I've done, manufacturing and retail and so forth. And I enjoy it so much that I don't really care about revenue now. In fact, I don't care about revenue at all now. So that's a nice place to be. But when you're working when you're working for money, and you have a business and you have a lot of employees, you have a responsibility to make good decisions about where you're going, and how are you going to give people raises and pay for their health care and stuff like that. And so you want to make sure you're going the right place. So, okay. So this is sort of the conclusion of this discussion. So should you reopen at all? This is sort of a negative thing. So after kind of talking through what we've talked about, so if opening continues to be a loss, then when is too much debt to take on? We talked about this specifically with Mario's and other similar restaurants. And we talked a little bit about this in our collaboration network show last week. And oops, I went too fast. And if you put your cash flow out too far, or if you cannot open completely, like say 50% of your restaurant, you're going to lose money for a long time. How much money will you lose, and how long will it take to pay it back? And that's why the cash flow format is so important. So, and how do you decide these issues? It's kind of hard to determine, but there are several sort of benchmarks. How much debt financing will be required in order to be able to maintain your cash flow? You got to have the cash to pay your bills to stay in business long term, but you're going to have to borrow money or find money to do that, which will put other pressures on the business. And then how many months or years will it take to pay that off? I heard the other day that there was one loan, SBA was doing one loan, and it was no problem. They were going to allow you to pay it off over 5 years. Okay, 5 years. Well, how much? Well, it's going to be a low interest rate, but a big number paid off in 60 months is still a pretty big number. And is that so much money that you're not going to take any money out of your business for 5 years? There are just some businesses that cannot sustain a heavy debt unless they continue to grow out of that. And we're in a situation where we may see, and clearly some industries will have no growth for a long time. I used to think that we were going to have a V shape, come out of it really fast, but now they're saying, no, it's going to be more like a U. And so it might be an extenuated U. It might take a long time. It's not going to be for some industries, the ones that are booming right now. The dairy is booming, Amazon's booming, internet companies, types of businesses are booming. A lot of kinds of businesses are booming. But the commercial real estate business might boom, but it's not going to be status quo. It's going to be turnover, new usage, all kinds of other problems, and probably a gross reduction in commercial real estate values for years, because people make long-term investments. And we're going to go through, a couple of examples, but the problem we're running into is that the tastes and activities and buying habits of people are being altered so much that the use of commercial space isn't just, the demand is just going to fall substantially. And this is a bad time to be in commercial real estate. It's a great time if you want to get in, because they're going to fall. You don't want to buy until they fall. And once they fall, it's a great opportunity. So someone's going to get hurt, the ones who hold these assets, and somebody's going to do great because they're able to come in and buy these assets at a good price.
I found a way to describe that. It's distribution of wealth is what we're dealing with right now.
Redistribution.
Redistribution.
It is. Yeah, no, it is. It's distribution and redistribution at the same time. The issue is that, well, if you have wealth and you make sure that you can become liquid in a way as to be able to leverage that, then you're going to be able to do well. If you don't have any wealth, it's a lot more difficult to gain it to start with. It's a lot easier to keep it and to grow it if you've got extra money. But wealth is always relative, having $5,000 in the stock market in January, and had you anticipated this redistribution opportunity, you would have sold, and you would have gotten back in on March 18th or 20th or 25, and you would have made another $2,500. So now you'd have $7,500 in the stock market. You didn't have to be rich in order to be able to have a 50% gain on your money. You just needed to be lucky and smart. So what happens is the guys with $1 billion do the same thing, except they make $500 million instead of $2,500. It's kind of the same thing, but the opportunities to make money exist at every income level. That's important to remember. So it doesn't have to be big money to make money in some things. Now, if you're wheeling and dealing in real estate, you have to have a lot more than $5,000 usually in order to make that work. But I don't know. I started my first real estate investment with $3,000. So, it's not, and that was a long time ago, but that would be like $15,000 or $20,000, $30,000 today. So it's not that tough to get in and do some of these investments. And it takes time for them to pay off. And of course, you've got to be on the right side of it. I've lost money. I've made money in this market, in the stock market. But I've lost money before too, because it's really hard to do. You can't continue. It's easy to do once, and it's really hard to do 3 or 4 times. So, it's just, and it's the same thing with the business. You can, a lot of business owners do well in their first business, but that doesn't make them good business people. They were the right place at the right time, and they survived. And so somehow we think that they're geniuses, but you got to do it at least 3 times to be a genius. It's not.
Tesla in his 3rd time. Elon Musk.
Yeah.
He already checked those boxes off.
So yeah, doing what Elon Musk is doing, that's kind of hard to do. So, Let's see. Now, here's where we kind of get into the nitty gritty. That is, do you have obligations that will cause further asset loss if your debt's unpaid? In other words, that's pretty straightforward. If you own a house and you signed a note against your house, then that is entirely different to let your business go than if you do not have any assets. Because if you're going to just bankrupt and walk away, everything you've signed on personally, you'll be liable to pay for. That includes taxes, student debt, you'll still have to pay that. And then anything that you have put against your house, if you use collateral for that, then they're going to come and take your house until you pay the bill. If you don't have those things, then sometimes it makes more sense to gather what assets you have, wrap it up, and just hunker down for a while until things get better and try and reopen your business. And that's just, it's not the way anybody wants to play it. But business is sort of like, is business. People don't like the idea of leaving your vendors in a lurch and all of that kind of stuff. But we all have to remember that if we're in business, we take risk, and we carefully try to measure that risk and put the right value on that risk and make decisions about how much risk there is and how much gain there is. And so as a business person, over a lot of years, I've had a lot of people stiff me on what they owed me. And I haven't had one bit of angst about it ever. Why? Because I'm in business, I extended credit to them, and some of them don't pay. So, and there you go, it's that simple. And you have to have a good enough business and measure risk so that you've planned your bad debts. And if you keep your bad debts at 1 or 2 or 3%, it's like, who cares? I've seen people hold a grudge against an individual for not paying a bill. And all that does is tear you up and take your mind off of what's important. But so my point is that, as somebody used to say, one of my old roommates, it's like, you plays the game, you takes your chances. And that's what business is. And if you're going to play the game, you're going to take some chances, take some risks. And so, yes, people don't always get paid. That's part of the game. And so you have to make those decisions. It's not great for your reputation necessarily. But on the other hand, in circumstances like this, it's like, hey, who are you going to blame? You're not going to blame an individual who's not allowed to open his own business. You're going to blame the government, maybe. I mean, that's where the blame lies, or you can blame the disease. Try to maintain, though, your vendor relationships if you can by being honest and straightforward. And as I mentioned, you have to decide if staying in business is worth the time required to pay off the new debt. And then if you did go bankrupt, then would it prevent you from going back into business because you can't get any credit, can't get a loan? And that has to do an awful lot with the kind of business that you're in. If it's a capital intensive business and you've got to finance extensive equipment purchases, it's going to be tough. And it might be 7 years before your bankruptcy is wiped clean and you reestablish credit. So that's a long time to wait to get back into business. But those are all the things that you weigh in order to be able to decide if you're going to open or close again. So any questions about that? Or comments? All right. Then let's move on to the other. This is sort of like part number 2 here. So I'm gonna throw all of these in here because I want to go through them in a couple of ways. So let's talk about the marketplace and what has changed. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about this for a while and sharing a lot of stories over the next few weeks. These are some of the things that we want to look at. We want to know what the social distancing is going to mean in the future and how long it's going to last. There's a huge shift in the internet integration with businesses. Bricks and mortar and integration with new technology is going to be a whole new thing. Commercial real estate values, practices, and uses are going to change 30–40% probably. There's a death of retail. By that I mean reselling or distribution is what I'm talking about here. People today have been able to, but now we're sort of crossing the bridge here. Now, the most important asset that you have is going to be your brand, because it'll be the brand that you have left, because nobody can have, you know, a completely, totally unique product. Now, having said that, that's not true. There are a lot of unique products, and if your product is unique, then what you've done is you've created a niche market, and that's what it's all about. But when you think about what Amazon is doing to steal data, have you heard about what Amazon has been, some of the latest news on Amazon?
No.
No, I'd love to hear it though.
Well, this is really nasty. Amazon uses data. They say they don't, and they're having a big investigation because they were been accused of this. But they do, and I know that they do because we've had a client where this happens to them. They take all of the data on your product and they keep that, so they know how much money is being made. They know how well you're selling it, how well you're promoting it. They know everything about that product. And then they take a look at where you got the product. And if you're not a manufacturer, but you're a distributor or an importer or a retailer, you don't own that product. All you're doing is reselling that product. Well, because of Amazon, our distribution networks are completely breaking down. And so you don't really need to have wholesalers and distributors in local areas anymore, because you can just ship directly from wherever you are, even outside of the country. I bought a book the other day from India. You know, it's like they're shipping it just like everybody else ships. I wouldn't have been able to do that before Amazon. No way, because we didn't have distribution networks in order for them to find me as a customer. But now we do because of the internet. So what is happening then is that Amazon is going out and finding out where that product came from, and they're buying it themselves. They're putting their own label on it called Amazon Basics, or one of, I think, 57 other brands that they have invented over the last 3 or 4 years. And now they have stolen the business from the original product.
There was I saw that in the news on maybe about a microwave that somebody invented. They started selling the microwave that had the infrared on it, and then all of a sudden, Amazon come up with a product. I don't know if it was microwave. To be honest with you, it was exactly what you mentioned. And they came out in the news how they like, oh yeah, all of a sudden we're gonna go ahead and invent the best-selling product and push it up on the market.
Yeah, yeah. And so Wall Street Journal did a big research project, and they really kind of supported all of that notion. We had discovered this 6 or 7 years ago. John and I together wrote an article, actually a white paper, on how Amazon is affecting everybody. And basically, you know, at that time we still had a whole bunch of clients before we kind of sold them off and began downsizing the business, the Red Fusion I'm talking about. And but what had happened was this guy that was a client and also in one of our seminars. He carefully took us through how he had a pool cleaning product, and they had found it in China, and they were kind of exclusive. They were the only ones. And so he basically just on a lark decided to, because they just have a local retail store and they were selling it that way, which was fine, but they weren't selling very much. And so he put it on Amazon and he started selling this stuff, and they did $800,000 their first year. Mm-hmm. Well, what happened is that Amazon came in, did, just exactly as I mentioned, and then they put their own brand on. But here's the nasty part. In searches for pool cleaning equipment and supplies, they took the original product and pushed it down the list, and they put theirs on top.
They showed it in the back of the line.
Push them to the back of the bus.
Doesn't it feel like what Villa does a little bit? To a certain extent, still data?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Amazing what they do. Genius is what it does. But
Well, and so, the customer is assuming that Amazon is unbiased in terms of presenting products based on your search, but they're not. So there's a lot of trust here for them to lose. So the issue here is that what do you have left to sell? If Amazon can do this to you, what else can you sell if you don't have a brand?
mm-hmm.
Say they can do their own 501 Levi knockoffs, but they can never do Levi's. Levi owns a brand, and so people are going to buy a brand because it's Levi, because they have a certain trust, or they like the way it fits, or that's what they've always done. But at least they've still got a brand to sell. But if your brand means nothing and somebody comes along and knocks it off, exactly what value do you bring to the marketplace now? And the answer is nothing. You don't bring any value to the marketplace at all. So what's happening is this huge sector of our economy, consumer goods, and to a greater and greater extent all of the time, industrial goods even, is really being affected by this new distribution system. And many products, maybe 80% of the products, fit into a category where you just don't need to have a local warehouse, anymore. There are certain companies, retailers that buy from wholesalers still, because they buy in quantities, and you can't find a place that will sell you 144 shoelaces, and so those shoelaces are bought from a footwear findings warehouse in Los Angeles, because they still sell these little teeny objects in large quantities. So that still exists to a pretty large degree. But if you just want one shoelace, or two or three, you buy it on Amazon and you can still get it. So this is what we mean by the death of reselling and the birth of a brand. And so in every single case, the only thing that we have left is brand. We no longer have geography. Only really matters where maybe retail is important, like walk-through business, like in a mall or on a famous street, or where there's a lot of foot traffic. You still have, the geography still counts. There's going to be competition for a store that has geography, the right location. That's what they say about real estate, right location, right location, right location. So, I mean, that's still an asset and still matters. But for many of these secondary and tertiary locations, that geography doesn't matter that much anymore, because you can just as well get it from Amazon or others, not just Amazon, but all kinds of other places. So that's kind of what that is. The shift to consumer online usage for which I'm calling Zooming. And then within that, we have industries that like travel, which is going to completely change. Retail, restaurants, we've talked a lot about that. That's clearly. Transportation as a whole is changing because of automated cars, because of what we've just talked about. Manufacturing is going to change a lot because of what's going on with China. Construction is going to be affected, but it's not going to be affected as much as many other, manufacturing and construction, probably still going to be okay. And services, that kind of depends on a specific discussion about services, but that's just sort of like a quick overview of, well, what's happening with industries. And then we've got society, and there are all kinds of things happening in society, work, housing, commuting, and gathering. So I wanted to run through some of these. And so here's the question up at the top, or the issue at the top. And I just want to talk a little bit about some of these in the time that we have left. Social distancing. And so this is this is funny. Many in France say goodbye to the hello kiss on the cheek. Now, apparently that's, when they do the double or triple kiss on the cheek, it's called la bise. I can't speak French at all, but and what they're basically saying is that they used to greet people by touching their face with your face, but now nobody's doing this, and that it has raised serious question about life in the age of social distancing. Is France prepared to kiss la bise goodbye? So, it's sort of like, oh no, the French they've really got a horrible social thing to overcome. But the article went on, and it really is apparently an emotional thing for some of those guys. We might laugh of it in this country, but the same thing is going to happen with the hug and perhaps even shaking hands. So, there will be some.
What about the bow?
The bow.
The bow, that's coming. That's back. The Asian, the Oriental bow.
That's right. You might find China takes us over through the bow. That's right.
Military salute.
Right. And then you've got this other article too, which is the pandemic has changed consumer behavior, some permanently. I've got a couple of these charts that we'll look at. That's from McKinsey and Company, which does a lot of this kind of research. Now, the shift in internet integration, these are just a couple of headlines. So this is sort of the news part of our meeting. Double down on digital is what McKinsey is suggesting that people do as the number one thing. Consider the online sales, which increased at 14%, basically grew by 25% in simply a 2-week period in March. So that's a big difference. And grocery purchases were number one on that. So that's a profound impact. Of course, there's an urgency for retailers to expand their digital presence quickly. I think that's true of restaurants in a different way, but retailers have lots of different things that they can integrate. The whole omni-channel, many different channels of marketing have been around for a long time. The problem is they haven't been well coordinated. Now we're talking about omni distribution, many different kinds of ways to get it. You can have Walmart ship you the goods that you want to buy. You can pick them up in their store, or you can go shopping this regular old way. They'll do the shopping and they'll have them ready to pick up. So there are a lot of stores that are doing a lot of different things, making a huge amount of difference in the way that this is all happening. Bricks and mortar, in integration with technology. These are just a couple things. I have a whole huge catalog of stuff. Here are just two fun, interesting facts as of today. Facebook invests in India's top tycoon to transform retail. What they're doing, they have spent multiple billions of dollars to buy into a tycoon, a big business guy's retail connection into India. And what they're doing is they're providing these new shops. Have you heard Facebook is going to have a easy to set up store as part of Facebook, so that people can begin to sell stuff from their store inside Facebook. They just announced that a few days ago, and you can now see the coordination, because now we've got this huge investment in India, which is an enormous market, as you know. What they're doing is they are paying to go into some guy's store. He still owns it. They completely remodel it into a new, fresh kind of space, maybe small, 800 to 1,200 square feet, of which there are millions of them in India. They still have a lot of small shops and neighborhoods in India. And so they completely re-outfit this in India. and then they help them control their stock. And then what they do is they're going to put them on this online thing. And the idea is that when you buy, people from your neighborhood buy online, you can go pick up your whatever, your deodorant, your donuts, whatever they buy in India, and you go by and you just pick them up at this local store. And these guys are filling it, so they have the inventory, they have a custom shopping cart, and they literally are creating a online opportunity for a small independent businessman to stay in business, to modernize, and probably build a much nicer business because they're modern, it's cool, they're online. So big movements in what's going on with Facebook. The other thing that you're all aware of, but have you seen this chart?
Yes.
This chart here, if you've been on Zoom, you've seen this chart on Zoom because I got it right off their front page.
I've used about
Yeah.
Isn't that
everything
incredible?
but 2 of those.
How?
Now I'm having 4 Zoom meetings today. 4.
What do we have?
Okay, 3.
We
Well,
had
we'll have-
BNI, Lori,
you had that.
yourself, and then the collaborative board, same thing. All
Yeah.
new.
So I mean, I've been doing online meetings with GoToMeeting for I don't know 10 years maybe, and I had consistently 1 or 2 meetings a week, but all of a sudden I'm having 15 meetings a week online. This has transformed us unlike anything that nobody could have anticipated this. Maybe Zoom says that they did, but the fact that they're beating all these guys.
Google.
I mean, it's incredible. Now, Cisco WebEx has been around a long time, and they have a lot of money, and they know what they're doing. And take a look how they're growing. I mean, this is remarkable. So the thing that's interesting about this is not just the technical thing, but it speaks to both the integration with technology and also this huge behavior change, which is we're in the middle of right now, and this is profound. You can commercial real estate values and practice and uses. This is just one statistic, but 30% of all at-home workers say that they expect and would like to work from home. 30% want to work from home, but already, of the ones that are working at home, 57% say that it'll be the same, and 30% more, only 13% less. Now, what does that say about real estate? And I saw one of the ladies who is on Shark Tank, I can't remember her name. She's a real estate person herself. And so she had mentioned this survey, I think I saw this yesterday. She had said, oh no, she did her own poll. She polled all of her people, and she said, now, how many of you want to come back to work? How many of you want to stay home? She said that something like 50 or 60% said, I don't ever want to come back to work. And so she just smiled and she said, you know what that means, don't you? That means I don't have to pay for as much real estate. I'm going to cut my office space and I'm going to put that money in my pocket. That's how she responded.
What are we going to do with those empty space? Is that when creativity comes across?
Somebody else will take it. She doesn't care, but somebody else will take it. Or
we'll figure something to do with it.
Yeah, you'll find something, but the question is, will the value stay the same? And I think the answer has to be office space will not be as valuable in the future as it is today.
It's even going to be valued different from an appraiser standpoint, from the net operating income standpoint, and how it's kind of like valuing a gentleman's club where there's millions of dollars generated out of that small piece of real estate, but the value doesn't reflect the NOI. So the use of these is going to be challenging to, as the use changes, it's going to be interesting to see how appraisers value them. And it's probably just going to be a combination of, land value and improvements, and, not so much if there's any net operating income coming out of it. So I see that as a big challenge from a lending and investment standpoint.
Yeah. Oh, you're absolutely right. The repercussions of this is really going to be tsunami type waves. Most of us who are not involved in that may not feel it or see it, but it's going to kill some people, and it's going to provide huge opportunity for some people, depending on which end of that you're in. Um, personally, I have some investments in residential real estate. I've often thought I'd love to have a really nice prime piece of commercial real estate, maybe just for fun. And now I'm thinking, boy, am I glad I never got into commercial real estate. Because
Yeah.
this is a really, really bad time to do that.
There's that mixed-use new code in San Bernardino where you can have your business, office, and living space all in one. So I think that's coming. And I think Quicken Loans literally created a blueprint in Detroit of how the new cities of the future are going to look.
Yeah. Well, right, and so it's kind of exciting from that perspective. If you don't have a whole lot of paid up assets, sitting there, and you don't have to stand that devaluation, then it's a great place for people. And I know Matt has been considering getting into doing TIs and conversions and that kind of stuff, and to be able to go to this mixed use, and reconvert these things so that you really have a little bit more residential mixed in with the commercial for those places that can actually do that. We'll figure out how to redo this. But in California, I mean, think about the opportunity of, we don't have enough houses for people to live in, and the cost is too high. And then all of a sudden we have more industrial and commercial space. How can we convert that so that we can get both housing and retail and workspace, and maybe even a little bit of industrial space, mixed in? If we can learn how to make those neighborhoods work and nice, well, we could solve a bunch of problems at once. It's just that the people who own that real estate are going to go through hell trying to figure out how they're going to either stay in and do it or sell and lose money. I mean, it is really going to be a sea change. It may not happen very quickly like a tsunami.
I know, and I believe it or not, I don't know why I get excited to talk about that, but if you because I wanted to.
Same here. I think there's going to be, and I've been talking about this on the residential side too, is that historically our rates for these loans have been just low as ever, and I see a lot of opportunity for taking over mortgages, subleasing with property owners for repurposing or reusing without having to inject so much startup capital into these properties. So I think we're going to find a lot of landlords that are going to be open to those types of creative deals rather than trying to find a buyer to pay full price for a loan that they may have on it. So taking over, I mean, I always look at it as a seller, or the existing debt it could be leverage, or it could be a positive, or it could be negative depending on the terms of your loan. And if you have a low good rate, you still might come out on top by providing creative financing to an investor that would not necessarily qualify or want to qualify for traditional financing and pay that whole loan off. So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of that going on.
Well, and there's an interesting opportunity to kind of reconfigure the way property is owned. Put together
reclassification of uses.
Yeah, that too, and of course, working with the government, will be an interesting part of that. But to do something like a tenant in common piece of property where a business owner might be able to pay for his business space and live above, or something like that. Inside a complex that is shared, with other people. Because right now the way it works is that it's difficult for a business owner to gain the real estate assets because everything's for rent. There's not much for sale. And small business people need to be able to have, as part of their portfolio, real estate that appreciates, because their business doesn't. But their real estate can appreciate. And so I've always hated the way we've developed over, say, the last 30 years in terms of pushing people out of their commercial property and only providing rental for it. And that's, I mean, there are a lot of reasons for that, but anyway. So yeah, real interesting. We'll have a lot more to talk about on this subject. And then quickly in society, big changes. 64% say they're fearful for their health. 82% are fearful for their other people's health. 88% say that they're worried about the impact on the economy. So a lot of people are worried about a lot of things. And so the social distancing and this kind of stuff that is changing that we're trying to figure out now is really going to have an impact. Here are a couple of additional statistics that are fun. If you take a look at the census, you can see who's out of work here based on various, and it's just horrible. 47%, this is of families. Of families, 47% experienced one person or more losing their job. For all educations, less than high school, 56%, bachelor's or higher, 38%. These are all ridiculously high numbers. They're crazy. But look at Hawaii, 54% of them have been affected by this, mostly because of the tourist industry. So when we say what's going to happen to tourism, well, it's not going to be good until people finally figure out this social distancing or not so freaked out. Various different states. You can see the sort of wide open states, those except for the DC. Of course, government, they always get paid no matter if they do any work or not. So, but Wyoming, Kansas, Montana, Idaho, these places seem to be less than anybody else where they maybe are spread out. Take a look at now this is an interesting article that I think is going to really have a huge effect on where we're going to be for years. I'm kind of convinced because of this. They have basically come up with this whole idea that large gatherings, if you allow them, this is going to be what our death rate is. If you keep it to 50, it'll be this. And if you do not have mass gatherings, it'll flatten out. That pretty much says where we're going to go, you know. I don't know why I put this here, but we already talked about that. So this crowd thing is part of the problems. This is the same
Under 50.
Yeah, let's try to keep our gatherings under 50 then.
Well, that's right. And so they see the big events are the key to the spread. They're saying that this is super spreading events is what they're calling them. And they have tracked them in Germany, Louisiana, Skagit County, and Blaine County. And these are the places where they've had these big breakouts. And then they now see that SARS and MERS was also a result of super spreading events. So that's kind of saying we are not going to be having concerts. We are not going to be having big events. We're not going to have loud. I mean, they said in the article that music in bars that is too loud causes people to talk louder, and therefore they spread the virus. And that they can't have loud music if they expect to be able to control the virus. So there you go.
So my wife, soccer, no football, she's like,
Casey, come on. Hey, we're going to be able to watch that on TV. There just won't be anybody in the stands.
we're going to have to come up with fake audience laughter and screams.
Man, we have got to get football back, you know. I mean, if we're going to have to stay home, we got to have some sports.
Yeah, they got helmets.
Yeah, that's right.
Make them motorcycle helmets or something.
Right. So that's pretty much it. But this all comes back to how does this change your business plan?
Oh, you better redo everything. I was just thinking about this, Ron, right before, maybe 2 months ago, and I shared this with Edgar, that our family, we were in baseball, travel baseball, and we were in negotiations to lease a 8,000 square foot warehouse like around March, and the guy ended up selling to a 1031 exchange buyer. So I'm just starting to run those scenarios down and say, okay, well, if we were going to bring in close to about 150, 200,000 to get this thing started, what I'm going back looking at my cash flow projections that I put together, and it's I got to change everything now because of the social distancing for fitness facilities that wasn't mentioned up there. I know that gyms are going to have a hell of a time with. I don't think it's gonna affect them just as much as a restaurant would because they're built off of their capacity. And I know memberships. People, forget that they have a membership, and that's how they bank on a lot of the revenue. But having a full capacity might restrict the utility or the use, the square footage use, like you said, as far as scaling down and not being able to. I just that domino effect is going to be something that is interesting to watch. But I'm going through and trying to figure out how we could have made that work in transition. The only thing that I could think of was online, but that doesn't cover the majority of the income that we were coming from the groups that we were bringing in. Like our business model was based off of teams of 15 to 20 coming in. So
Right.
Well, talk about
that is a totally different business that I got to go back and figure out if that's even something worth doing now.
Yeah, it completely changes that business. And my next door neighbor is going through exactly those kinds of calculations. It's like, how is he going to get the same number of people in that space? What kind of mitigation is he going to do? Does he have to put in a brand new air filtration system to evacuate the air and put it back in faster? So, I mean, it's like, could be a whole mechanical cost in order to make that work now. But this idea, we've only had a chance to touch on these things, but we can spend a lot more time on every individual one depending on your interest. But the idea of integrating the internet or technology in with each one of these businesses really has to be a part of the plan. And so it's like you've only got your brand to sell. Now the guy over here is like totally buff and great body, great workout guy, knows nutrition and that kind of stuff. So you can tell he's a pretty good motivator, leader kind of a guy, somebody who can develop a good brand for his business. Well, why hasn't he taken this time to do more videos and to realize that he's going to have to supplement what happens in the gym with videos? There are a lot of people that become video stars, but they just haven't moved that direction. But now you're faced with, you got a couple of hundred members, and how are you going to keep them involved? And if they're worried about coming to the gym, why don't all your workouts on video too? And why don't you do live streaming for these so that you've got 4 or 5 or 6 people and you alternate when they come in, and everybody else gets to do it at home. So it's like you really have to change your paradigm. Everything's changed and you got to reconsider everything.
I was thinking about this of combining fitness with financial fitness as well too, and then splitting the audience between the two individuals. We're flirting with that idea with, like, I don't know where this idea generated here. Then we have a gym guy that does MMA. That I told him, just find up the new membership. It might be a bigger audience, but think outside the box, like play around with it. This is a time when you don't get to be judged as a crazy man. We're coming up with some crazy ideas that might work, Yeah. And so I told him, like, find a way. Maybe we can put you in as a financial / physical fitness, a mindset type of thing, do some bundle with some people or something where you now sell a package that's more valuable because you get that in addition. You get priced higher. I was throwing stuff like that out there, just joking around.
Yeah, maybe that's something that I would like to touch on too, is how businesses are creating new products or new bundling packages, services. Right. There's a lot of that going on as well too. So
Well, innovation is going to be a really key part, and it's going to be higher than it's ever been potentially in the next 6 months or a year. People are going to be really thinking about new and different ideas. And so we should focus on innovation. I've done a lot of innovation in my life, and I've been thinking more recently about having more conversations about innovation, because
absolutely.
innovation is sort of like the way that you create niche markets. So if you make money in a niche market, the question is, how do you get there? And innovation is how you do that.
And the ultimate goal from this original create a resource center to then turn it into an incubator, that's kind of like the big dream for the guy owning the building. That's exactly what the incubator comes is. The innovative section of it becomes, I have an idea. Do you have the resources to put it together?
That's right.
We have one of the best resources, the coaching aspect of things. Okay, check that box off. And
we got 70,000 square feet to put some office use for some repurpose of new innovative use here. So
this whole place.
That's right.
Animation building, we can do something with it.
Yeah,
Well, I'm looking around. I have an entire empty lot. We're the only live business currently in the lobby, so that gives you an idea.
Yeah, well, so there's one giant opportunity waiting to be exploited.
Humongous 75,000 square feet of opportunity is what I look at it.
Right, that's right.
And I don't have to pay for his salary. I mean, a loan.
Well, we have kind of come to the end of our time, and so we probably better sign off. We got a couple other things going on today, so.
Yes. All right.
We'll do that. Thank you all, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. We'll continue to push this stuff, and we'll talk more about innovation too. And all of you need to come back. Let's all talk about, after today, all of you talk about how you're starting to think about your own businesses. That'll be a fun conversation to have.
For 2 p.m. right now, Ron, what we talked about right now, is that what we're going to kind of go over for the Facebook group, or something more tailored?
Yeah, I could change that around a little bit, but there's an awful lot that would be the same.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. We'll see you all. Thanks very much.
thanks, Ron.
Ron, see you next time.
Bye.
Hey, you got another one, Kevin?
Do it.